Welcome back to the Local Perspective. Jerry Deschane here with the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. The pandemic, how did your downtown do? My guest today is one of Wisconsin's leading mayors and has a really interesting background, but an even more interesting story to tell about how they weathered the pandemic up in Door County and how they are looking forward to kind of bringing everybody back, bringing everything back to economic life in good shape. My guest is the mayor of Sturgeon Bay, David Ward. Dr. Ward worked for the university system for the longest time, was actually the chief academic officer, according to my record, something like 15, 18 years. Good morning or afternoon or whatever it is, David. How are you?
I'm great, Jerry. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you very much for being here. A little bit of introduction for those of you that don't know Mayor Ward. So would you prefer Mayor Ward or Dr. Ward or David? Which one should we give you?
Dave works really well.
Okay, all right. We will have to dial back my respect and admiration for the guy and just call him Dave. But Dave worked for the UW system. He taught finance at UWGB for a number of years. Taught at the UW Oshkosh for a number of years, was chancellor at GB. Was it? Am I right on that? You're
Actually,
the interim
chancellor both at Green Bay and Oshkosh.
Okay. And then when he retired and when he decided to put his feet up, he started a company. You may be familiar with the name North Star Economics. It's an economic forecasting firm, does a lot of work for the state of Wisconsin, and is one of the premier economic forecasting firms, all of which I'm sure Dave will tell you was to get him ready to be the mayor of Sturgeon Bay. So did you find your background in finance helpful, Dave?
Very helpful. Very helpful.
Well, and thank you for being here. And I'm sure that it was, because we want to talk about what the pandemic did to local economies, how you respond to it. But, given your rather unique background, I'd also like to get your sense of where we go from here. So let's dive in. How were things going for Sturgeon Bay pre-pandemic?
I remember it well. We were doing extremely well. We were set up for a very good, if not record, tourist season here in Sturgeon Bay and in Door County. Our manufacturing businesses were doing phenomenally well. And the city government was working well. We were short of housing and also workers, but everything was set up. It looked like it would be a terrific year.
And then boom, it hit. Last March, the world changed. So what were your immediate challenges as mayor?
Well, it happened so fast. March 15th to the 17th, rumors, various things happened. Then the closing of restaurants and bars. What did we have to do? Well, first of all, we had a general election coming up in a few weeks. So we were going to have to conduct a general election in what was then a pandemic. We had to think about staffing, fire and police, public safety. And in that first couple of weeks, it was trying to figure out what the rules were. We had mask, no mask, mask, closed, then 10 or, groupings. And it took a while for the federal government, the state government, and county to sort of settle down and come with a set of rules. So that was confusing at first. We had to find out a way to develop, to carry on with city government, because we couldn't have large gatherings anymore, hearings, that sort of thing. So we formed an emergency management team. One of the big challenges was getting all the virtual connections set up. Couldn't meet in person, at least initially. So trying to figure out how to use some of these platforms, Zoom and so forth, that was a challenge. Big issue was the survival of our local businesses because literally the doors were shut almost without notice. And we have a lot of service industries here, restaurants, various hotels and inns and B&Bs. So we had to think about that. And then a huge issue was just the safety of city staff. So right away we got hit with all of those within, a couple of days of this thing settling in.
Mayor, what do you think? What did you do? What did you find out that worked right? That you essentially had to invent a lot of this on the fly. I know all of our cities and villages were to one degree or another. What really worked well, in your opinion?
We developed a kind of system of communication within the city, this emergency management team I made reference to before. And by doing that, we had the major actors in the room every day. I mean, I didn't give anybody a day off until Easter, which was like 3 weeks, 4 weeks. So every day we met. We kept seeking out information, the league videos, you might recall those.
I recall with some pain a lot of the early teleconferences we had.
Yeah.
That didn't work well. But once we went to video, it worked better.
Yeah, and they were valuable because you could hear other people experiencing your problems and gather a little bit of information here and there. It also worked well to make good connections with the county because in our situation, unlike a larger city, the health department's a county function. So it's important to be in sync with them and with the county board and the county administrators. So all of those things were important to build up. Our staff just did an outstanding job. So having a great staff is very vital. So we kind of worked our way through this sort of a step at a time, controlled what we could control, and that took probably 3 or 4 weeks to sort of normalize. And after it normalized, we were able to get back to some of the projects and goals that we had pre-pandemic.
Well, and what was happening in your business community? I mean, you have Sturgeon Bay is sort of an interesting mix of manufacturing and tourism. Your hospitality industry, I'm sure, was nailed really, really desperately, wasn't it?
It was. And one of the things economically about this pandemic is it was very uneven. So on the one hand, the manufacturers more or less continued along. We had a number that could figure out products that kind of fit into the pandemic, and so they switched production. We had a shipyard that had contracts, so they carried on. But what they needed to be concerned about, and the HR people were concerned about, was the safety of their workers and preventing outbreaks in the businesses. So on the one hand, you had one group of folks who were trying to protect their workers, get to the COVID protocols. And on the other hand, you had businesses that were shut down whose workers didn't have a job anymore. So that kind of imbalance was very marked in the first 2 to 3 months. Then, things sort of started to sort out. And as ironic as it may seem, 2020 was almost a record tourist season for us.
No, really?
Yeah. I mean, sure, some businesses not so good. Others, record years. So a lot had to do with adapting quickly, carry out meals, protocols for bed and breakfast and hotels, So people outside of Door County thought of Door County as a place with a lot of space. You could spread out,
Sure.
social distancing, convenient, close by. So we drew a lot of people from certainly the northern Illinois, the Twin Cities area. And we did get a fair number of people who just moved up here into their second homes. Remember, this all occurred just as spring was, coming on, and so the weather was getting better and all of that. So a very unusual year, and there, was pretty important that payroll protection plan and program. That was really important to keeping a large number of our hospitality and tourism businesses going. So it was a very weird year. From literally, if you looked at the stock market, you might remember it just fell off the cliff. But 4 or 5 months later, it was sort of back, and that's kind of how business was here.
Yeah, a very weird year. I think that's what we ought to put on the annual report for 2020 and just leave it at that. It was interesting, the Wisconsin Counties Association did a sales tax analysis, and overall sales taxes really weren't down much, but what they did see was a shift in where those sales tax revenues were occurring. Instead of the Brown County, Outagamie County, Milwaukee County, sort of the shopping centers, Dane County, you saw more sales tax increases in more rural areas. Did you have the sense, Dave, that people in your community were huddling in their homes doing a little bit more shopping online? Were they patronizing downtown businesses? What did you see?
Well, it was, and this is an exaggeration now, so don't get too excited about it, but it was elbow to elbow in the hardware store.
Yeah.
So people went to the hardware store. They were buying these green egg charcoal outfits and doing a lot of projects. So the hardware store did well. The paint store did extremely well. We have a couple of paint stores. Walmart did well. Target did well. So a lot of the merchants were okay. Mm-hmm. Then there were other merchants whose business was down substantially, in the bookstores and that sort of thing, where browsing and kind of moving around in close proximity with others was the norm.
Yeah.
So we definitely did see, I think, more local spending, and there was a lot of money that came in through this influx of folks, some of whom, not a huge number, but some of whom are actually going to become permanent residents here.
Okay.
What it really showed, though, right away, and this is a popular topic I know in the league, was how badly we needed better broadband service. The internet connection was just extremely important. So we had people, in some cases, actually setting up their own tower so they could get internet service. Now, it was satellite service, so it's not necessarily the most robust, but still, the pandemic showed us a couple of things: the importance of that service, and also that people could actually live away from Chicago and continue to do business. So that was very important. The other thing I need to mention is we were extremely fortunate to have a very good public health and private hospital clinic situation here. So our healthcare is, for a county of about 27,000 people, it's bigger and it's largely because we in the summer we may have 250,000 people on the peninsula on any weekend. So we actually are counter-cyclical to the normal healthcare business. So normal healthcare, not much happens in the summer in a city, and then all the operations and procedures occur in the fall and the spring. We're just about the opposite. We do have this surge in the summer season, and then when the tourists go home, we do have a fair amount of local options in terms of orthopedics and other procedures that kind of keep the hospital in good shape through those slow months. So we had very good health care. So that encourages people to think about, I'll be okay up there. There's somebody that can take care of me.
Did your medical facilities have to cut back on non-emergency procedures? I know initially in the pandemic, the whole medical community seemed to do their own little shutdown, but that took a while to cycle back out. What was your experience in your community?
We had that experience where, because at one point we had over a dozen COVID patients, and we're a 25-bed critical care hospital. Fortunately, the 25-bed critical care hospital, the new hospital was built right next to the old one, which was never taken down. So there was some expansion space. We could actually exceed 25 people. But between the ordinary care that we were giving for other illnesses and COVID, it really pressed our hospital for probably a period of 3 or 4 weeks.
Okay.
And then that began to settle out. I think a number of things happened. The protocols for treating people improved. The general understanding of what the virus did and when you needed to be hospitalized, all of that kind of sorted itself out. At the beginning, I think you can remember, it was all about ventilators.
Yep.
And now I think you could go on the market and buy a lot of ventilators for pennies on the dollar. That didn't turn out to be the therapy that everyone at the beginning thought it would be. So it was extremely interesting. You could write a number of MBA case books off of what happened, even in Sturgeon Bay.
Yeah, I would take a little step back here and remind the audience you're watching The Local Perspective, which is a program done in partnership with Wisconsin Community Media and the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. I want to thank in particular Maura and Jeff and the folks at K-Sun and Sun Prairie who have set up this connection. I'm talking with the mayor of Sturgeon Bay, Dave Ward, about how the pandemic hit his community, and just as importantly, how they reacted to it, which I think in many ways is both typical and atypical with what you saw in your own communities. Dave wrote an article on Sturgeon Bay's experience. It's in the February issue of the Municipality. Dave, we talked about, the coping strategies, many of the things you did, what worked better than expected. What were some of those things that you just kind of wanted to kick under your desk because, well, we thought this would work and it didn't?
Well, it's not so much that as the other challenges that you couldn't do something about. For example, we had an outbreak of COVID infection in our fire department. Now, in the city of Sturgeon Bay, the fire department's an excellent fire department. We've just had a major fire that probably everybody heard about in the shipyard.
Yes.
And I'm talking about a major fire that took a lot of technical expertise to put out, and the ship is still floating. So we have a fire department of about 24. Fortunately, because we are this kind of peninsula arrangement. We're a long, narrow county. We've developed over time the mutual aid pacts with virtually every fire department in the county. So when we had to go down, got to the point where the chief and the assistant chief were working normal fire shifts. I mean, that's not their job, but they had to fill in. But we also had the ability to back up with fire departments to the south and fire departments to the north of Sturgeon Bay. And that ship fire, by the way, we had fire departments all the way from the Door County line in the south to the tip of the peninsula. That's how, together we have to be in order to make this work. So that was, that was something we couldn't just, snap our fingers or put some money on it. You need people. The other thing that didn't work, and we just couldn't do much about it, was what I told you before about broadband. Whether it was broadband for kids who were in distance learning situations, or it was broadband for people who are kind of moving their business up here temporarily to escape the larger city. You just can't solve that quickly. But, on the balance, I'd have to say we came through this very well. That there's an interesting picture because the cover of that magazine that you held up shows a string of cars, the taillights of a string of cars. And it's an unusual picture for the front of a magazine. What story does that tell? But it really illustrates the extent to which our businesses and our tourism bureau, particularly Destination Sturgeon Bay, figured out ways to kind of make it through and make it interesting. Because what that picture shows is an event called Unwrapping Sturgeon Bay. So normally we'd have a Christmas parade, and the mayor would be in a convertible and all that kind of stuff for a small town parade, and that would happen right around Thanksgiving. And then people would kind of gather and hang out at local places, but couldn't do that this year. So what they decided to do was to ask the merchants to decorate their windows, but to put paper, like brown wrapping paper, over the window so you couldn't see what was in it. And then on a particular night, and this is the night of that picture, people were told to meet up on the west side of the city. We had a big parking lot in front of a hardware store. And the idea was you were going to drive through town and the merchants were going to pull the wrappings off the window. So it was going to be a 6:30 parade, and they wanted the mayor there. So I said, okay, I'll come there at 6 o'clock, and my wife and I and my dog, and we'll be there. And the expectation was we might get 100, maybe 200 cars. I got to this parking lot early, before 6 o'clock, and literally they had to find a parking place for me to park. And pretty soon they were parking in the hotel parking lot in back of me. And then I looked out, they were parking across the street in the funeral home parking lot. Turns out that picture captures a few of the 500 to 700 cars
Wow.
that were in this parade that went through town. I mean, people just needed to get out, and they responded just wonderfully. And then there was some walking around town, but there's plenty of distance and space, and so the picture was worth more than 1,000 words, and it contains a lot of good ideas and creativity. So that sort of thing is uplifting too. It helps people to feel, okay, we can make this work, and we'll get through it.
What is that? And I take that as a very hopeful sign going forward. What are you taking away from last year as a lesson, and more importantly, as a challenge of what Sturgeon Bay needs to work on going forward? Is broadband the number one?
I would say it is. Broadband's extremely important, both from a education standpoint, but also from a business standpoint. And it's a county issue.
Well, and that was my next question is, are you talking about broadband just in the city or in the whole region?
No, I think we have to work together on this. And what's good for the city is good for the county. What's good for the county is good for the city. And so there is a task force now that's, I think, completed an engineering study of what do we need to do. So then we need to all get behind it and get some funding to greatly expand this. So that's certainly one thing. The other thing I've talked about a lot is what I call soft infrastructure. So yeah, you've got your roads and your bridges and all of that. That's physical infrastructure. But it was the connections, I think, among organizations that really made a difference here. It's the hospital working with the city, working with the county. It's the county working with the city. It's the manufacturers working with the county, the city, and the hospital. And so we were able to see that we had a pretty robust soft infrastructure, good organizational infrastructure that communicated well. And then brought into this pandemic, that grouping of organizations and networks were able to work together. So I can't emphasize that enough. I've, as you know, done economic consulting work for over 20 years now. And not every community has the infrastructure to do what we did. And I have to point out our Economic Development Corporation, which is countywide, Door County Economic Development Corporation, was just absolutely crucial, both as a gatherer of information, particularly federal aid programs and state programs, but also in then pushing out a lot of information that we would get, for example, on COVID protocols. So those things all fit together. When it comes budget time, we make a significant contribution to the Door County Economic Development Corporation. And the question always is, well, what do we get for that? And the answer was, take a look at 2020. We got an enormous amount because we had that in place. It's a very hard point to make sometimes with taxpayers, but it proved its worth in this last 12 months.
Boy, I wish we had another half hour because I'd like to dive deeper into that. How do you develop soft infrastructure? Dave, we're down to about a minute left, and I want to thank you again for being here. I want to thank Wisconsin Community Media and KSUN in particular. Any closing thoughts? I mean, if you could go back to February of last year, anything you'd do differently or anything you would tell your fellow mayors that you learned?
Since you're giving me the last minute, I'm going to kind of flip the script a bit and tell you that we're really looking forward to 2021. And we have so many things that have happened and are happening in Sturgeon Bay. Projects, the Maritime Tower, waterfront promenade, a number of other things that are happening. And we invite everybody to come to Sturgeon Bay because I think we've really crossed into another territory and we're going to be a great place to visit.
Excellent. Well, and as a matter of fact, Dave, the League Board of Directors is hoping to be there in July. So hopefully we will have a chance to sit down with you in person.
That would be great. That would be great.
Thank you. My guest, Mayor Dave Ward from the City of Sturgeon Bay. Thanks for joining us here on The Local Perspective.